Hi, I'm Dr. Bob Zybach with Oregon Websites and Watersheds Project, Inc.
I'm McKenzie Peters with Northwest Maps Company.
For the last 4 years, McKenzie and I have been working with Tasha Livingstone and her F251 class, forest recreation class, focused on recreational opportunities on the Elliott State Forest. This is a project following 2 years of coronavirus restrictions, so we're working with students remotely. Field trips have been distance learning field trips, and in that time, we've had to shift from meeting in person to working on video. Kenzie, do you want to describe how this particular project was put together?
The students did their reports on Zoom, and I used Adobe Premiere Pro to edit them together.
All right, everyone, this is my final for my forest recreation management class for spring of 2021 for Southwestern Oregon Community College with Tasha Livingstone. A little introduction. The Elliott State Forest is located northeast of Coos Bay, up near Reedsport on the coast. It is roughly 82,000 acres within the Siuslaw National Forest. This area was originally used for logging, although it is now a state forest. And this forest does contain roughly 40% of untouched forest land. And what that means is that it is forest land that hasn't been logged and is part of the original section of that forest, and it is currently managed by the Department of State Lands. This forest was established in 1930, and it was Oregon's first state forest. It was named after Francis Elliott. He was the state's first forester, and so it was pretty cool that they were able to name that after him, as he unfortunately did pass that same year. While the Elliott State Forest doesn't have an active or open trail system, it does have lots of logging roads that do give access to most of the area. And this area was subject to quite a bit of logging, and it did fund the Oregon Common School Fund. The recreational use of the area is mostly public land, camping, botany studies, hunting, and recreational fishing, as it is a state land. It's currently managed, like I said earlier, by the Department of State Lands, and in the past, the forest was extensively logged to fund the Oregon Common School Fund. And in this is the Oregon Common School Fund helped give funds to the school system. And while it was a vital part of providing funds because of the amount of timber that was being harvested, it started to have a vast impact on the area. And as of 2017, that funding did end. And while the land board doesn't intend for the Elliott State Forest to have limited human use and management like other state forests and wilderness areas, it does plan on moving forward with management. And the current group usage is for research, for OSU, as well as SWOCC and lots of conservation. There's lots of animals that breed in this area, and several pristine salmon spawning grounds for both the coho salmon and the Chinook, which is vital to their survival. The methods I use to obtain my information include the Portland Audubon, the Oregon Wild, guest speakers from our resource recreation management class, and the ORWW Media YouTube channel, as well as the website. And it is my recommendation that the Department of State Lands does proceed with the research draft plan given by previous classes. I think this is a great area that could really benefit from research, not only in recreation management, but overall as well. And these are just several of my resources.
Greetings, everybody. My name is Michael Kwiecinski, and I'm here with Southwest Oregon Community College's Forestry Recreation Resource Management course. It's a continuation of Tasha Livingstone's courses that have taken place over the last 4 years, these last 2 of which have been virtual because of coronavirus. The year before accomplished a road inventory, and this year our class is looking to do an entire site assessment of the Elliott Forest. So with that, let's get started. So the lands that would become the Elliott Forest are vast. They're almost 91,000 current acres. They're old. They were founded in 1930, protected in 1927 by Calvin Coolidge. And they have an immense and rich history, and this presentation can certainly do no adequate justice in attempting to encapsulate. So original intentions for the Elliott were as a working forest and a profit generator. That was for the school's common fund. Environmental protections, the legislation during the 80s, most notably the Endangered Species Act, caused something of a shift of the Elliott to be more of a financial burden towards schools instead of a profit generator. There was a lawsuit in 2012, as well as various other conflicts and controversies. The most recent development with Oregon, the Elliott State Forest, is that OSU has entered into an agreement with the Department of State Lands to manage the Elliott as a working research forest. The OSU proposal will place 65% of the forest in reserve, 34,000 continuous acres, with 15,000 of those acres located within harvest boundaries. This is to help allow for age stand differential and a more old forest in general. It would also designate no more than 1% of the forest's volume to annual harvest. This equates to about 735 acres annually, which is not a bad sum. So some of the methods that we use to do these assessments, perform these assessments, because of the virtual nature of coronavirus, our class took field trips virtually to these 5 areas. Most of these were hosted by Dr. Bob Zybach, but they also included interviews and commentary by a number of knowledgeable persons and people with familiarity of the Elliott Forest. So we visited Elkhorn Ranch, the Dean's Mountain Lookout, Loon Lake, 10 Mile Lake, and Golden Silver Falls. These, of course, are by no means the only sites within the Elliott State Forest, and many of them involved other stops as well along the way virtually. So, yes, for example, when we were visiting the Dean's Mountain Lookout, we also had stops at 3 other lookouts along the way, or at least former sites of them, Elk Creek, Trail Butte, and Cougar Pass, as well as 2 former CCC camps, Muddy Flats and Camp Stewart. So the virtual trip to Loon Lake, for instance, that includes stops at Mill Creek, the Deans Creek elk viewing area, and the Hinsdale Rhododendron Gardens, which I had no idea existed and were seemingly quite beautiful. I intend to make a stop there as soon as I can. But these peripheral stops did add to the entirety of experience, and without them, assessing the conditions of the site remotely would have been a difficult task. So they were and these interviews or educational field trips were also the principal source of material for accumulating on-site observations. I unfortunately no longer live near Coos Bay. I'm way north of Springfield now, so I haven't had the opportunity to visit the Elliott like I did in the past. But the variety of sites that the forests do offer for recreational promotion are great and diverse, and the usage reflects that diversity. Another very important source was all the content that's available from Oregon websites and Watersheds Project. It's just a treasure trove of information about the Elliott, the history, I mean, the politics if you wanted to get into that, but so much more. It's an abundance of images, pictures, and several of them have been used for this presentation. Also, the work of the 3 preceding classes was absolutely fundamental and necessary. If without them, there's little chance of this being a successful continuation of those reports. 2018 Elliott State Forest Recreation Plan became the 2019 Elliott State Forest Recreation Plan with recommendations. Coronavirus shifted the nature of things, and as I said, last year's course did a virtual roads and trails inventory, and this year's course attempts to do a virtual site assessment, and we'll see how that goes. So other primary sources include the Oregon State University's research proposal, as well as the working draft that is currently under development and taking comments from the public about the Elliott State Forest Habitat Conservation Plan. Some other readings and articles that have been associated with the course have been implemented as well. Personal recollection and experience on the Elliott may be drawn upon occasionally. But our findings, or my findings particularly, so each of the 5 sites has significant recreation potential and the ability to be promoted differently towards recreationists. Offering diversity can increase visitor use and enjoyment, but can also increase instances of visitor conflict and the likelihood of adverse environmental impacts. So tailoring the use of an area as benefits, increasing priority management of resources. It also allows for more focus and managerial mandates. And several sites like Elkhorn Ranch, Cougar Pass, Gold and Silver Falls, they're excellent opportunities for educational and interpretive centers. The mission of OSU is it's committed to managing the Elliott as an educational and research forest and being inclusive as possible for all students at all levels. Appealing to a broad range and a diverse range of youth is going to be critical for continuing appeal of public land management, and when they become voting age, they tend to fund in favor of things like that. So as visitor demand increases the rate of attendance, pressure will increase to establish or develop facilities or structures to serve the visitor base. A lot of the Elliott, in fact, almost all of it, is without even rudimentary facilities. Gold and Silver Falls has a vault toilet, but it's going to be one of my recommendations that those facilities be modernized to accommodate an increasing rate of attendance. But that rate of attendance will also increase environmental pressures. The Elliott is just a disjunct nature of roads that kind of branch off and go to former landing pads and, you know, connect here and there, and many are broken and deteriorated and not used anymore. Barely even recognizable as roads, some of them. But that does lend itself to a lot of illegal dumping, littering, illegal camping, fire pits, and the worst, and I've had personal experience with this on the Elliott, is encountering off-season poachers, wildlife baiters, various people of that ilk that I don't choose to associate with on a normal day. But also it increases reckless recreational shooting. So many times somebody might go out walking a dog and come across just a trash pile of broken glass and this and that and whatever that is shot up. This environmental degradation, it's not the only degradation that exists, of course, but it will increase with visitor use. So it's important to isolate it as fully as possible from sensitive and critical habitats. I wrote here that fee implementation is generally met with distaste. That there's evidence that that's true. There's also evidence that reasonable fees are, you know, they're not a detriment to the number of people recreating in an area. So for OSU and the Elliott as a research forest to fund expansion of recreational opportunities, it should remain a profitable and working research forest, one that embraces the multifaceted aspects of this role. So much of a working forest isn't in logging operations. It's, you know, there's a working forest protects habitat for sensitive species, and it provides clean watersheds and so many aspects of what goes into making a forest operate. And a lot of those can be turned into a profit generator with management and public understanding and positivity towards management and positions. So recommendations. I wrote here that the principal management agency is Oregon State University, and their intention is to maintain the Elliott as a research and educational forest. So any collaborations to increase recreation should be in line with those plans. I think that follows and makes a little bit of sense. My first recommendation, this is to continue the efforts to rebuild Cougar Pass Lookout. It's a grassroots initiative. Can find it on cougarpass.org. These current plans, and I'm not sure exactly where they stand as of today. Last year, they seem to still be a viable option, but because of the fire watch history in Oregon's pretty vibrant, and Cougar Pass is one of the last, if not the last, standing fire watch tower on the Elliott. It could be a considerable tourist and recreation draw to restore that tower. Dr. Zybach did mention something like a 4-tower tour that could be promoted. That would be an ideal hypothetical situation where all 4 towers could be rebuilt to their former glory, and it would be a very, very interesting and fun draw, and something that would bring people to the Elliott Forest. Let's see. Also, facilities at Gold and Silver Falls. I mentioned that I was going to mention those, and pressures on the visitors are increasing. At least it seems that way. I've had a hard time finding exact numbers on at least a year-to-year basis to show a trend in recent recent increase in use at Gold and Silver Falls. However, there's popularity of phone apps like things like All Trails, social media that is likely increasing the exposure of these places and visitorship. Last time I was there, the restaurants were a vault style, and if visitorship is to increase, and Gold and Silver Falls is one of the more scenic and attractive of recreation opportunities, at least for day use and hikes and such, then those facilities could be modernized, parking could be expanded, and it would be an ideal place for an educational interpretive center as well, should the number of visitors permit that. And if trends really do continue that way and OSU is interested in implementing a fee-based use system, that would probably be the ideal place to test it. It's one of those situations where a user may be inclined to pay $3 to $4 to $5 to park to use the area for a day. Right now, it's currently free. I don't disagree with that, but it is a form of revenue that could potentially be explored. But Elliott's new role is not necessarily as a profit generator. That was the original value of the state forest, was to create funds for education, but the new value of the Elliott really is an education directly. As a research forest, it has the opportunity to improve the technologies and the methodologies that could shift the entire world perspective of how managers could and should be managed. Clean technology, clean harvest technology, new methods that might improve the whole entire ecosystem health. And it also has the opportunity to implement as many new and unique ways of incorporating forest and nature education into classrooms as possible. Remote nature of education anymore, not just because of coronavirus, but just the education is tending towards being online anymore, and delivering that to the classrooms should really be a goal of managers. The traditional field trip to the forest is still an excellent way to expose children, but it's limited in the scope of children it can reach, youth that it can reach, and what can be done, essentially, because liabilities and logistic concerns that remote and virtual field trips delivered to a classroom really have the opportunity to delve deeper into the both the typical and non-typical aspects of forest management. Much more sophisticated look. So some of the ideas that I dropped in that regard, drones. I'm not the biggest fan of them personally, but drones could allow for flyovers. They could investigate and tour harvest operations, so kids can actually see, what goes into taking trees out of the forest. It can go into certain areas of sensitive habitat, not all of them, of course, because of disturbance. And I wrote here, a fun little activity to get kids engaged is, they can remotely control the drone for a little bit. Of course, there'd be something of an override, but allow the kids to drive it around, fly it around, and essentially patrol the forest. If they're about to crash, then you override and there's a operator on the other end, of course, but that's one way to engage youth remotely to help them become positive and concerned future citizens. I also wrote live broadcasts and streams from foresters, rangers, forest officers. That sort of stuff is fun for people to watch, but it can also be an incredible learning opportunity as well. And my last recommendation is, and this is more maybe internal to Oregon State University, but I would have all the natural resources students, all the forestry students, everyone that, all the grad students that are actively engaged in work on the Elliott and research on the Elliott lead seminars and the field trips for those younger K through 12 use. It's a great way to perpetuate interest in natural world health, and it also increases the well-roundedness of the students coming out of OSU. So those are some things that can be done to embrace the Elliott's new role as an educational center and research-based initiative. I've put a number of citations here, and no one really wants to read those, but they're all super relevant. And that's about it. I really hope everyone enjoyed my presentation. I hope I did okay on it. I ended it here with this little thing that is taken directly from the College of Forestry's Oregon State Elliott State Research Forest proposal, and it's their commitments. And right here in the middle, it says, this work may build upon the existing works of Oregon websites and watersheds, as well as the work here at Southwest Oregon Community College. So I really feel that we're doing important work on a very important piece of history to the entire Coos and Douglas County, Coos Bay area. Not only that, the entire state of Oregon. So thank you, and I hope you all have a good day.
Hello, my name is Matt Parish, and this is my Elliott State Forest presentation. Overview of location. The Elliott State Forest is located near the southern Oregon coast. It sits northeast of Coos Bay and southeast of Reedsport, with a landmass totaling approximately 93,000 acres. The Elliott State Forest is Oregon's first state forest. It was created in 1930 and named after Oregon's first state forester, Francis A. Elliott. The Elliott State Forest was created for the purpose of funding Oregon's Common School Fund, meaning that the revenue generated from this particular forest helps fund Oregon schools. The Elliott was created by combining chunks of scattered land, state land, and trading those properties for a block of Siuslaw National Forest, similar in size. A healthy forest. The Elliott State Forest is known to have some of the most productive and pristine streams for coho and chinook salmon in the Coast Range, says the Cortland Audubon. The Elliott State Forest provides a great habitat for marbled murrelet, as well as the northern spotted owl. Activities. The Elliott State Forest is open to the public and is a great place to enjoy a wide variety of outdoor recreation. This activity includes, but is not limited to, hiking and sightseeing at Gold and Silver Falls. Gold and Silver Falls is the picture on the left there. Watching wildlife at the O.H. Hinsdale Interpretive Center, as well as camping and boating at Lynn Lake. O.H. Hinsdale. Pictured to the left is O.H. Hinsdale's Interpretive Center. This building has a few informational signs about the site. It was built in 1991, and visitors are able to view elk, birds, and other animals. Here's a picture of Lynn Lake, the dock. Management on-site. After watching the guest videos provided and reading some previous F251 assignments titled 2018 Draft Elliott State Forest Recreation Plan on ORWW.org, it seemed that there may be a lack of maintenance in regards to the roads. One video showed David hand shoveling rock into potholes, and another video showed David as he explains that the buildup of rock on the edges of the roads will eventually cause a washout and lead to more expensive issues. On the 2018 SWOCC-Elliott State Forest Draft Recreation Plan by Tara Boyd, Daniel Patton, and Matthew Smith, they stated that the current condition of the roads through the Elliott are not suitable for some vehicles and limiting access to potential recreators. This is a picture that was in there. Methods used to collect information. I mostly use the videos provided and a little bit of internet searching, mostly on the ORWW.org link. I found a website called Audubon Portland with some useful information. I also discovered some useful information on the OSU forestry page. That discovery led me to the research that OSU is going to be doing with managing it. From what I gathered, there seems to be a few places to enjoy activities while visiting the Elliott State Forest, such as like group activities. These places include Loon Lake, O.H. Hinsdale, and hiking at Gold and Silver Falls. It seems to me like in terms of group activities, nothing's really changed over the years. Camping, boating, hiking, sightseeing, and fishing seem to be a top choice. Findings, environmental and social. From the videos provided in previous class assignments, the 2018 one, I gathered less litter, more road maintenance, and more road signs could improve environmental and social conditions. Litter causes a person to perceive a place as a dump, and this may cause displacement. Lack of road maintenance may limit who is able to access the site, and as David previously mentioned, lack of road maintenance may potentially cause a road washout and lead to more expensive bills. Lack of signs may discourage someone from wandering off too far in fear of getting lost. This may also cause displacement, maybe they'll go somewhere that's more familiar. Findings, managerial. The State Land Board gave the go-ahead for OSU's Forestry Department to manage the Elliott State Forest as a research forest. The State Land Board's decision for the forest is 1, to remain publicly owned and accessible, 2, decouple the forest from the common school funds and release it from its obligation to generating funds for schools, 3, continuing habitat conservation planning to protect species and allow for harvest, 4, as well as providing for multiple forest benefits such as recreation, education, and working forest research. Recommendations. After gathering information from a few sites and the videos provided, I feel that the direction the Elliott State Forest is heading is in a positive one. The videos provided in past student assignments suggest that the roads were in poor shape and trash was abundant, and in later videos we were made aware that the trash issue was getting better and the roads were getting better as well, or being maintained. I think that it is great that OSU will be using the Elliott State Forest as research. It seems like it would be hard to figure out what your plan to do is if you don't do some research first. So that's great that they're doing that. I'm also pleased to know that the public will be able to enjoy the forest and all the beauty that it has. And this is where I got all of my information from, with some links provided. And that's it. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Cooper Lynn and I'm doing my presentation on Mudrunners Camp. So Mudrunner Camp is located approximately 6 miles north of Gold and Silver Falls and south of the Elkhorn Ranch, right on the West Fork Millicoma River, in the heart of the Elliott State Forest. The main plot of land is about 10 acres in size and spans more than 300 yards on the West Fork Millicoma River. This property was part of the Elkhorn Ranch and was managed by the Gould family back in the late 1800s to the mid 1900s. This was one of the homesteads and it was used as one of the main fields for grazing livestock. Prior to the Goulds homesteading on this lot, this area was primarily thick brush and timberland. So in 1961, they cut all the brush and cleared it out to make space for the growth of new grass with the idea of making it pasture land. 10 years later, the state of Oregon came in and attempted to make horse stables, but it was never completed. Since then, there has not been any attempts to revitalize this area and has been used by mud runners, hence the name, for four-wheeling and mud bogging. So here is a picture of the location. You can see it's right by this little clear cut. So for methods, I primarily use on-site observations as well as my own pictures to illustrate the importance of this site in the hopes of seeing some type of management interest. I also use a small snippet of video of information from Oregon websites and watersheds field trip #1, Elkhorn Ranch, with the interview of David Gould by Dr. Bob Zybach. Findings, environmental. So obviously for what this site is and what has been used for in the past years, there was multiple areas where there was soil compaction. There are a lot of deep ruts that fill up with water in the wintertime. On the west side of the lot, there's lots of trails that go up in the hills that seem to attract a lot of garbage. Things that just shouldn't be here. You can see right here, there's a culvert, piece of culvert. There's a lot of brush. There's a lot of cut wood, cut alders. There's no drainage system, and that can cause water to accumulate and cause erosion from the excessive soil compaction. There's a lot of brush that overgrows the trails as well. So since this area is so small and overgrown with brush and alders, there has been a concentrated area where individuals set up camp. This has led to a disruption of vegetation and animals in that given area, but we can also say the same thing for every other campsite pretty much ever made. It's also very popular to cross the West Fork in vehicles, which most definitely has led to an increase in water pollution. Oil, gas in the water, the declining health of many different species of fish, as well as land animals who drink from the river. There are areas where the river is shallower, allowing for vehicles to pass without making contact with the underside. But many people take chances and cross the river in deeper spots, depositing oil, grease, gas, other toxic chemicals into the water, essentially affecting everything that, to a certain extent, survives on the water of the West Fork. On the other hand, the vegetation of this area seems to be very healthy and growing rapidly. With the opening of the lot facing east, trees and vegetation get a lot of sunlight and are most definitely not starved of water in this area. The river is extremely clear, and in my opinion, it probably has the clearest water in Coos County. There are large Douglas firs that surround the entire lot. That gives the area plenty of shade and protection from the sunlight, but still allow that glow to come through the branches. There are an abundance of deer tracks scattered throughout the camp. There's plenty of birds chirping in the evening, and there's a lot of protection from the wind since it's in a valley. Moving on to social. So again, since this area is so small, there are not many places to camp, which can lead to overcrowding extremely quickly. This area has not been managed in years and is not recognized by the Forest Service as a campground. The state has not developed this site, so there are no restrooms, showers, running water, designated camping spots, picnic tables, or fire rings. Without the development of Mud Runners Camp, you can expect some users to have less satisfaction in this current state. Those who participate in mud bogging could potentially cause conflict with other users of the camp where they're enjoying the river or with their family on vacation. From the information I gathered in my observations, there are multiple different types of users that could benefit from the development of this site, but there has to be some sort of even ground for the equal relationship of family-oriented activities and such as like swimming or camping and mud bogging. So as the area stands right now, specialization is occurring. The majority of activities that have been focused on is four-wheel drive pickups and ATVs, which some recreationists do not have access to. Mudrunner Camp is geared towards outdoor enthusiasts who have an interest in mudding and have been using this area for that reason for many years. So those who are not interested in that activity could see this area as one to avoid. So moving on to managerial. So like I previously stated, this area has not been managed by any government agency in many years. The only management that I had seen was that they brushed the road, but they brushed the main road in probably 3 years ago, which has already started to grow back very quickly. The state has obviously had some involvement with this area because the road has been re-rocked in the past few years. There are also concrete pathways that run across the river for people to drive on, as well as some culverts that run along under the main road. When you try to look up Mudrunners Camp on any maps like Google or Apple Maps, you won't have any results. This area is tucked away and excluded from the main roads that connect Marlow Creek to Larson. It's quite a trip to get to, and you need to have prior knowledge from another source to be able to get here. Being that it's so secluded, that may attract more visitors. So there are no regulations, only current laws that apply to public land. There are no signs or any facilities on the property either. The way it stands today, there would be a lot of primary work that needs to be done in order to input facilities there. The amount of vegetation that has grown up will take a while to cut back. And doing so, this would open the area up for many campsites. You can see bathrooms could be put there. There are multiple different springs that the state could tap into in order to get running water to the site. The development of this site could be another source of income for the state and would allow for more recreationists to enjoy the outdoors in the Elliott State Forest. So moving on to recommendations, if the state decides to develop this area, the first thing that they need to do or to look into would be filling in the deep ruts that are there. After this is achieved, the vegetation and brush needs to be cleared out to a specific size. Then the construction of campsites and facilities can begin. The way it stands today, it only caters to one specific group, and that's mud boggers. I believe that this site should be changed to a traditional campsite because it would cater to the large percentage of recreationists that enjoy going camping and would allow the state to generate more revenue. The way it stands today, it only caters to one specific group, so the site would have designated camping spots, but would not take away the four-wheel trails that already exist there. This way, it doesn't take away from the history and primary use of this site, but also allows for recreationists to enjoy the area as a whole. As you can see from the pictures, there's lots of potential for this site to be developed, and there's lots of room for campsites. It's already a very flat spot, and it would be simple to integrate facilities. With a few weeks of work and a low startup cost, Mudrunners Camp can be used to its full potential. It's a beautiful spot, and it's right by the water. Thank you very much. Here's my works cited. I appreciate your time.
This is Nathan's report on the O.H. Hinsdale Rhododendron Garden on the Umpqua River, on the boundary of the Elliott State Forest. Hinsdale Family Garden History. It was developed by O.H. Howard Hinsdale. He was a hunter, a fisherman, and an avid plant hunter, traveling around the world collecting plants, often from private gardens. It was planted mostly around the 1940s. This property holds some of the oldest and some of the rarest display of rhododendrons. Many large specimens were shipped or hauled in. It was maintained by the Hinsdales or their tenants until taken over by the BLM to help promote the nearby elk viewing area. Along with rhododendrons, the garden has a variety of decorative trees, azaleas, magnolias, and camellias. He connected the island to the mainland with dredgings from the Umpqua River. Discoveries environmental. The land is prone for flooding, typically only open during the blooming season, March through September. High waters could become hazardous. The home on the property did not meet the criteria to be a part of the National Register of Historic Places and ultimately seen as an attractive nuisance. Removal of the structure occurred in 2015. New Zealand slugs have been found invading the area around the garden. Social, currently classified by the BLM as an administrative site compared to a recreation site. Unfortunately, this means it is not open to the public and can only be seen by private tour. In order to make this park public, the BLM must evaluate the safety to access the park along with the plants, materials, and other protected species within 55-acre garden. It would make a positive impact on the community by refurbishing the garden and adding another attraction to the scenic Umpqua River. 500 visitors a year can make it crowded, though there is plenty of room for everyone to stretch their legs. Managerial. The American Rhododendron Society, as well as the local volunteers of the Friends of the Hinsdale Garden, are committed to helping restore the garden. The shuttle service has been down for over the last year with no reopening being mentioned, leaving visitors to park along the road to access the garden. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, the garden has been closed since 2020. Though they are maintaining the garden, the east side bridge has been removed, making access more difficult. Here is a slide, and you can see in the white square, the bridge. Signage along the highway should be added to acknowledge the area. Cuttings from species within the garden could be planted along the highway to help promote the area while also helping to absorb more water. A designated parking area in the red would allow for people to visit the garden without having to cross the highway. Turn lanes and signage along the road would need to be developed. Adding a walkway from that parking lot to the main garden would help make the area more accessible for elders or anyone with disabilities. Also, the trail would highlight the river where signs on local fish species could be added. A rain catch system could be used to store water and utilized in the drier months. It would require irrigation to be installed for the first time on the grounds. The area is prone to floods and sits in the 100-year flood mark. Thankfully, being on the inside corner is somewhat less susceptible to erosion, but the nearby creek beds do not help. Huge thanks to Jerry Phillips, David Gould, Bob Zybach, McKenzie Peters. References are 2020 Elliott Field Trip number 3 to Loon Lake on April 23rd, 2020. Recreation project plan for the OH Hinsdale Garden Spruce Reach Island Bureau of Land Management, Coos Bay District, 3/17/2010. Hinsdale Rhododendron Garden, Reedsport, May 19, 2014. Colette Kimball. The American Rhododendron Society and their extensive journals on the area. Spruce Reach Island, the Oregon Coast Secret Rhododendron Garden, Part 1 through 3.
Okay. There's always that awkward silence when someone starts a Zoom. I can't escape it. All right. This is my final project, Elliott State Forest for F251. Tasha Livingstone. My name is Gideon Cole. Let's do this. The Elliott State Forest is 95,000 acres in between Reedsport and Coos Bay. The area has been historically ravaged by fires pretty intensely. Francis Elliott, our Oregon's first state forester, set aside this land. He got the grant from his governor buddy in 1911 and oversaw the land until his death in 1930. Coincidentally, the area was called the Oregon or the Elliott State Forest. So it's, you know, and coincidentally his last name was Elliott, you know, weird world that we live in. The boundaries are really this is what it looked like back in the when he oversaw in the 20s and 30s. The boundaries were really rudimentary, being really blocky and cut up into sections, with the only real physical barrier being the Umpqua River to the north. In contrast, this is what it looks like now. A lot of the regions to the west, south, and east were tacked on as a means of generating revenue for the Oregon State Educational Department. The 1930s saw the end of Herbert Hoover's horrible presidency, and FDR was elected. In 1933, he brought in his New Deal, which sought to stimulate the economy as it was going through the Great Depression, the worst depression that America has ever been through. The CCC was part of it, Civilian Conservation Corps. This sought to give jobs to young men. So these CCC camps were erected all throughout the infrastructure of the Elliott State Forest. And as you can see, this green line right here was the CCC roads that they created. They created the roads, they created telephone wires, they created facilities that were used all throughout the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. Some of them are still used today. And even the Lakeside Airport that was built in 1937 by the CCC is still in operation today. Big part of what they did was they surveyed and mapped and located the land as to sell it for lumber companies back then. They'd fly over it in their planes and take pictures. The beginning of World War II saw the US declaring war on Japan. And by that time, the CCC lost a lot of its momentum. And once the US declared war, all production stopped. All of the land had to go towards all the roads, though, telephone wires, all the lookouts that they had were all forced to go towards the military effort. These lookouts were erected. One of them is on Dean's Mountain, lookout for incoming Japanese planes because it's so close to the coast. Not a lot happens in terms of forestry back then, but this booklet was released in 1943, and it entailed the Conservation Act of 1941, wherein logging companies had to either leave 5% of their land uncut or replant after they were done, or something else that had to be, it just had to be approved by the Oregon State Board of Forestry. This is an example of one of the planes that they might have flown over the area that existed from the 1920s all the way up into the 1980s. They were doing that. 1955 saw the full full-time management of the Elliott State Forest. This is one of the crews in the 1950s. These are the models of the cars that they used to get around the forest. 3 of them are horrible choices, but I'm not one to judge. The 1962 Columbus Day storm saw 100 million board feet of timber blown down. And most all of it was cleaned up and salvaged by the state forest managers, who were, you sell salvaged lumber, which is lumber that's either, been blown down or burned and fallen, or too thin for the timber companies or too old for the timber companies, timber that's been killed from insects, any of that, they would salvage it. They'd sell it, and then all the revenue would go towards the Common School Fund. By the 1970s, much of the Elliott State Forest was accessible by roads. You can see the CCC working here on these roads in the 1930s. The 1980s saw some of the most clear cutting that has ever gone on in this area. 1,300 acres were being clear cut at that time. Clear cutting is when a timber company plots out a section of land and cuts everything in between. So it increases the susceptibility of landslide activity, as the trees are not there to hold the sediment in place, as well as relocation of all the critters that used to live there, and the upset balance of the equilibrium within the habitats. The Common School Fund was probably the biggest propagator of all the actions that were taken throughout the course of history of this. It's still enacted today. Most of the Elliott State Forest land to this day is obligated to fill its quota for making money for the Common School Fund, which greatly limits the management's opportunity to conduct what they want to. It's not a very popular region for recreation because of all of the land being dedicated to logging and making money. It generates millions, but it also costs millions. The 2012 lawsuit saw the lawsuit of timber companies being negligent and endangering species when they're clear cutting. Again, really bad. My methods were watching the Elliott State Forest field trip videos. I have never been here before, so I'm just kind of going off pictures, I guess. The SOCC Student Resource Center, a lot of the articles that I use to find my back up my information around there, as well as the Oregon State University website. Oregon State University has had their hand in a lot of dealings throughout the Elliott State Forest throughout its entire history, because it has generated money for the school, which in turn the school is allowed to do research there. They conduct a lot of research there. My first issue is logging and clear cutting. That's the first thing that I would tackle in this situation. That was one example of it near Trout Creek. You can see that area has been clear cut and is just starting to grow back a little bit. As you can see by the dark green spots, most of it has been cut in the very recent past, being, taking at least 50 years for those trees to mature and grow back so they can be cut again. And a lot of it has already been cut and they're just waiting on it. And timber and logging is still raging throughout the forest. They're unrelenting. Here's another example of the clear cutting that's going on. This is up Dean's Mountain, and this is a pretty good example of the fact that now that these trees are gone, the susceptibility to landslide activity and all these minerals going down with the water into lakes and rivers. And it's the cause of why most lakes and rivers in the state of Oregon are eutrophic. They're dying because this sediment influx is killing all the wildlife that lives inside of it. This is an example of one of the 1980s landslides near Trout Creek. River pollution, Milk Creek, again, all the sediments flowing into the rivers, killing all the fish inside of it. My recommendations for this section is get out of the Common School Fund. It is very bad. It is basically not generating money for the Oregon schools anymore. They're making a lot of money, but they're also spending a lot of money. And if they do have overheads, they're very small and they are few and far in between. Cease salvaged lumber sales. Salvage lumber is arguably worse for the environment than regular timber, and it's not. But when a tree dies and falls, it is meant to decompose into the environment and make the soil that much more rich. But when it dies and they salvage it, they take it away and sell it, it is unable to rebound the soil, and the soil is less fortunate to grow back to what it was. One good thing that they did was they said they're not allowed to salvage any trees along rivers and streams, which is good because that is better for rivers and the health and life cycle of them. One of my more radical ideas is the alternative solution to lumber. I wrote a report about this a while ago, but bamboo is far cheaper to produce, creates a heck of a lot of oxygen. They grow incredibly quick, and their tensile strength is like 4 times the size of pine. So that is something that needs to be pursued. I think that's one of my ideas, but yeah, it's just something that I like to think about. Another one of my issues is mud running and off-roading. As we read in one of the chapters earlier this year, the environmental impacts of the removal of destruction of the sediments, removing them and flinging them everywhere. It also compromises structural integrity once you take out foliage, grass, weeds even. They are no longer able to hold the sediment where it needs to be. So the water comes in and takes it and creates mud pits, and they flow into rivers, and it just creates all that bad stuff all throughout the Elliott. The noise and vibrations disturbing wildlife is a big issue, but also with that is the displacement for visitation. A lot of visitors don't like hikers and observers, photographers, joggers. They all are, I would assume, not that welcome to seeing a FJ cruiser fly past them and flinging mud everywhere. That creates social conflict, and that is something that needs to be dealt with and at least confined into one area. My recommendation is the old CCC road revitalization. The road running from Dean's Mountain over to Cougar's Pass is still used today, but there are smaller roads that are around that area that spring off of that. I think revitalizing that and putting all those vehicles there rather than all over the entire forest, containing them in one spot, saying you can go over here and do that there. And then just being able to upkeep that area and mitigating the damages there. I think that would greatly help the displacement and the visitation conflict that goes on with it. Another one of my more radical ideas is electric vehicles only. That is obviously a really horrible idea right now, but when electric vehicles come more available, I think it is pointless to have the literal thing that's killing the environment, which is a gas guzzling car driving all the way, in the environment. It's just kind of counter. It's pointless. And I think electric vehicles only would, first of all, kill the numbers of recreationists coming there. I think a lot of them would, no one wants to drive their brand new Tesla in the forest. So hopefully that'll cut the numbers pretty decisively, so that we won't have as many visitors. Forest fires in this area, forest fires have been a problem, not necessarily a problem, it's just part of the forest life cycle, but paired with the logging and the lumber industries, it is becoming a very big problem in them tag team killing the environment. It just ravages through the entire region, and it kills a lot of the animals and a lot of the vegetation. Now, the environmental impacts of this is pretty obvious. Now, how do we go about solving an issue that is and has been a natural occurrence since trees have been in existence for millions and millions and millions of years? Well, prescribed burnings, prescribed burnings, prescribed burnings. One more time, if you don't understand English, it's prescribed burnings in Spanish. What do prescribed burnings do? Prescribed burnings dissipate fuel potential for fires. Back in the 1950s, they would burn the slash. The slash is all the unused timber that would fall, like the branches and all that would be burned. But they stopped somewhere around the 1960s. And that was a horrible idea because all that slash sits there. And that is, yes, it has potential to decompose into the environment, but it is major fuel for potential fires that come through the area, which will only make the fires more grandiose and large. Prescribed burnings also promote diversity in the wildlife. It kills some of the smaller rodents that are overpopulating, I guess I would say. And you can look at 100 articles on the online and know all of these things in great depth. It recycles all these nutrients back into the soil greater than it would if it were to just decompose over the time it would take to decompose. So it's saying that prescribed burnings are tremendous for the environment is an understatement. They are necessary, I would say. They're necessary. My final recommendations for this area, split the park into sections. Like I said earlier, from this old CC road that goes through Dean's Mountain, Cougars Pass, Powderhorn, I think this should be where the containment of the off-roading scene should be, in and around there. And that has potential for crowding, and the perceived crowding might be pretty bad since that lifestyle typically isn't welcome to more and more people in such an area. But the thing is about that type of scene is once you have a vehicle, you are then motivated to stay longer, and you're motivated to bring more people because it's more comfortable. It's more attuned to what you're used to regularly. So I think that confining them into one smaller place, and admission fees is another big part. If you want to bring a vehicle in, admission fees, because that will also bring the level of people wanting to come do this down. It will also generate revenue for the park itself. I think that a lot of the observation and hiking should go on in the southern regions, like where Gold & Silver Falls is. It's already a really big part of it. But 10 Mile Lakes area, down in Trout Creek, all these places down here in the southern Elliott State Forest, I think is a lot better than having everybody, it's like a free-for-all. Everybody can go do whatever they want anywhere. I think containing and segregating each space into their own things is a lot more beneficial. It cuts down on the visitor conflict. It will let the forest rebound in places. Again, I do not think that the timber companies should be coming in here and still logging. I think it is bad for the environment. It's obviously bad for the environment, but I think it is not doing enough good to offset the bad. So in that, it lets the forest rebound places in some places. Again, start bamboo farming. That's my tinfoil hat idea. Segregating different types of recreationists, I think, is the most integral part in the recreational resource part of it, because the displacement that goes on where perceived crowding is up in some places, rather than if two places are the same, are populated the same, but one place is like connotatively less populated, then it's going to seem more. And that is always, I feel like that's going to go on more in the northern part of the Elliott where the denser forests are. So I think with the off-roading scene and the camping scene, that should all take place north, while the day trippers, the observers, the hikers, that should all go on towards the south. And I think my bamboo farm should be conducted near the sides of the 10-mile lakes, where people have already planted palm trees and all these aesthetic stuff. Buy back the land, please. Buy back the land. I think it should be publicly owned but federally managed. I think the Oregon Department of State Lands and the Oregon State University are already trying to do this, and I think that is great. Keep doing that, because this deal that the Oregon school system has is not good and doing very bad things. It frees up managerial freedom. They are able to do my previous suggestions any way they want, because they have no obligation to create these revenue. So they are free to do what they like. They can charge admission fees to make the money. And I think that is a lot better than having this obligation to create money for the school system. And for the love of God, burn your land. Prescribed burnings on 1,000 acres per year. Right now, they are doing prescribed burnings on about 74 acres per year. That might seem like a lot, but in a 95,000 acre plot of land, that is not nearly as enough. It is not enough. Prescribed burnings, I think, should be conducted on 3,000 acres per year, but 1,000 is probably more realistic. And I think that should definitely go on in this, in my recommendations. So that is the end of my little PowerPoint. I hope my ideas weren't too liberal, and thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Jackson Hammer, as you can probably tell, and this is my presentation on the Elliott State Forest. So without further ado, let's get into this. So brief history about the Elliott. So the Elliott State Forest is this big swath of land here, and around the sort of border Loon Lake, it's covered up by this little tag here. Since Oregon was originally developed or originally dedicated as the 33rd state in 1859, the Elliott State Forest didn't actually come about until about 1930, and I'll explain a little bit about that in just a second. Before that, this whole sort of swath of land here, if you can see my mouse, if not, it would mostly encompass the Elliott State Forest and into the lakes to the west. So that was a big, crazy fire that burned lots of land, and that happened in 1868. And I will explain a little bit more about that in just a second. Discussion for creating the Elliott State Forest didn't actually begin until about January of 1912 between Francis Elliott, the founder of the Elliott. There he is right there. And I believe it was Teddy Roosevelt. I could be wrong about that. Anyway, the first lookout tower was established in the territory that would later be known as the Elliott State Forest in about 1914. However, the forest was originally developed, or officially, I should say, developed until about 1930. And it originally encompassed around 90,000 acres, which would be the darker green spot you see on your map there. Now, a brief history of recreation in the Elliott. So, since it's actually one more thing, the Elliott here was the Oregon's first state forest and the first state forest to be developed, as previously no other state forests were really a thing. It was more so national parks, mostly developed by Teddy Roosevelt at the time. So when Oregon got the Elliott, it was sort of a big thing, and it was originally tied to the Oregon Common School Fund, which would be any revenue developed from the state forest, like such as logging, would go towards public schools. Now, recreation, as it's public land, it has been in public hands for a very long time, almost 100 years now. Because of this, hunting, fishing, hiking, biking, what have you, has been happening in the Elliott for a very long time. Forgive me. So with that, there's been something unique about the Elliott, I should say. It's there aren't very many official sort of campsites to specifically. What campsites are campsites that have been developed by people who go to the Elliott, and trails have been mostly developed by the same thing. Mostly the only roads that have been developed in the Elliott are gravel roads that haven't been really developed. The only sort of real state or Elliott State Park or campsite that has been developed would be around Loon Lake, which is unfortunately being blocked by this little tag here of the Elliott State Forest, but I assume you get the idea. Because of this, the Elliott is actually very sort of steep and uneven terrain, so it makes making trails and campsites a little bit more difficult. Other than that, there have been lakes and rivers and streams, fishing, people hiking in the woods. Hunting has been happening for hundreds of years because the land, before it was developed or before it was established as the Elliott State Forest, was originally under Native American, several Native American tribe sort of property, as they have been using it for hundreds of years. So I will get more into management here in just a little bit, but historically, since it's a state forest, logging would happen there pretty frequently, and logging is one of the big sort of outputs here in the Pacific Northwest. Now, the Elliott, it's unique in this sort of regard, as all of the or most of the logging revenue would go to support Oregon's public schools in the Oregon Common School Fund, I believe it's called. Now, and this has been going on for a very long time, almost 100 years now, as I've said before, but it wasn't until about 2011 when things started getting a little dicey, and I'll get to that in just a second here, but Before I go any further, I'd like to explain some of my methods for gathering this information. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic that has graciously covered our nation for a little more than a year now, I unfortunately didn't get out to gather information from public sources such as libraries or peer-reviewed documents. I unfortunately had to only resort to relying on the internet for a lot of my sources of information. And I have a list of sources here at the end of my presentation. But before enough of that, let's get into the meat and potatoes, my findings. So some of the environmental findings that have happened here in the Elliott have been, like I said previously, fire impacts from the 1868 fire that ravaged 300,000 acres of land, that just decimated so much land. Hundreds of thousands of animals probably have perished, but in the aftermath, the forest began to grow back into the spectacle that we know today. Litter, as far as I know, there's been very little sort of litter, how would I say this, documentation in the Elliott, as most people who go there are either natives or locals, I should say, such as people from Reedsport or North Bend or Coos Bay, that know better than to litter and damage this area. Others are tourists who I feel have a amount of respect towards the forest, so that they don't litter, and if they do litter, hopefully they pick it up. Water pollution would mainly come from erosion from logging, as there wouldn't be any trees to hold the soil, and the trees or plants to hold the soil in place. It would leach down and into the water. Now, fortunately, this has been repaired in the in more modern times, as there have been regulations to protect like 100-foot barrier of trees that should stay trees within around bodies of water that have fish in them. Other bodies of water that don't produce fish necessarily still have about a 50-foot barrier of trees that should stay there. Vegetation breakage. This typically comes from people wanting to make trails in the Elliott, because, as I've said before, there aren't very many, if any, public trails or campsites. Because of this would cause people to want to clear out an area for themselves so they could set up camp or what have you. Trail braiding and trampling. Again, this would come from people wanting to create a trail through the trails through the Elliott, whether that be for hunting or hiking or biking or what have you. Campsite damage. Now, campsite damage is an interesting topic, as, like I have said before, there aren't very many actual campsites in the Elliott State Forest. Primarily, the only ones being the ones that people have created, which are just little offshoot sort of areas just smattered about the territory. The biggest damage would be falling trees in the area, overgrowth, and the biggest one, fire. Recently, within the past year or so, there have been pretty devastating fires that ravaged the Pacific Northwest, and I'm sure, as some of you may know, the skies turned red. It was rough, to say the least, and because of that, wildlife, deer, elk, bobcats, bears, what have you. I'll get to these two little fellows here in a minute. They had it rough for a while, but they got it. They recovered. Now, these two here, the Brecaranthus marmoratus and the Strix occidentalis, or the marbled murrelet and the spotted owl. We'll get to those two in just a hot second. Wildlife impacts via recreation. This would mostly include hunting. So the elk and deer population have more or less remained pretty steady throughout the years due to human intervention, and as well as natural predators. But these guys here, the marbled murrelet and the spotted owl, have it a little bit more rough than some of these more commonplace herd species. So, social impacts. Not too terribly long ago, conflict happened because of poor managerial decisions, and I will cover that in about one slide from now. Satisfaction, as far as I know, the people who go to the Elliott State Forest are either, like I said before, locals or people who, or tourists who want to just come and enjoy the area. And for the most part, as far as I know, they do, which is fortunate. Crowding, because there aren't many campsites or trails, like I've said before, there isn't terrible amounts of crowding. And this is because lack of sort of campsites. The biggest and most well-known being Loon Lake, which is on the easternmost edge. Displacement and use levels. Use levels come from hundreds of people using the Elliott a year. Hunting, fishing, hiking, biking, what have you. Standard recreation. And displacement would typically come from poor managerial options, which I will cover in just a slide here. The most noise that one would have to worry about for the Elliott would be along, let's see here, Highway 38 here in the north, heading east from Reedsport. And so as poor managerial options happen, we're going to start in about 2011, like I said, when things started getting a little weird. There was this big controversy about management as the state had tried to increase revenue from the Elliott from about 25 million board feet, or about 1,000 acres, to half of that being clear cut, to about 40 million board feet, or 1,100 acres, and 3/4 of that being clear cut. And that would push the revenue from around $8 million to $13 million, almost a $5 million increase. Because of this, some of this logging would have been illegal. And that is where the lawsuits of 2012 come in. The Cascadia Wildland Group, the Audubon Society of Portland Group, and the Center for Biological Diversity sue for further endangering the spotted owl and marbled murrelet. These two fellows here that I mentioned earlier. And because of that, this would come to 2013, where, because of the lawsuits, timber went in the hole. The price wasn't very good. And because of that, there was a cash makeup where there was going to be a $1,600 acre, or no, not $1,600, a 1,600 acre parcel sale of land, where the state would try to make up for some of the lost money. In 2014, this is where some amendments and lawsuits part 2, the return, happened. In February of 2014, 28 timber sales from the Elliott and other coastal forests were canceled to make up for the 2012 lawsuits that happened. And in April, the same groups as before, Cascadia Wildlands, Audubon Society of Portland, and the Center for Biological Diversity sue the state land board to stop one of the 3 parcels approved for sale in 2013. And because of this, sorry, there was there was going to be a land sale in 2017. The Oregon State Land Board, or the OSLB, voted on potentially selling parts or even all of Elliott State Forest. This was fixed later the same year, and it never truly went through because there was a massive public outcry. And I don't think, this is my personal opinion here, I don't think the Oregon State Land Board want to deal with more lawsuits, because as far as I know, they were pretty expensive. But the Elliott State Forest, its timber sale, it's, as you can see by this chart here from Oregon Live, the Elliott isn't really producing, here, let me move my, there we are, isn't producing money for the state anymore, or for schools. And so some of my recommendations for this would be separating from the Common School Fund. And this is mostly because as the Elliott is tied so closely to the school fund, there's not really a whole lot the state can do about the Elliott. If decoupling, for a good word, from the Common School Fund, if they separated, the timber harvest would no longer go towards benefiting public schools, but it would allow for more state intervention to happen. In fact, in 2017, the same year as some of this sale, about $100 million were actually put towards taking it or purchasing it from the Common School Fund, which would leave about $120 million. Now, separating it from the Oregon School Fund would allow for campsites to be introduced, parks to be introduced, or not really parks, parks, recreation spots, bottom line, would be introduced. And that would mean better trails for hiking, which would lead to less trail braiding or vegetation breakage. This would lead to more campsites being developed, so it would keep people from wanting to go into the woods. Hunters would more or less always have that free sort of reign to go into the woods and do their thing, but having it in more controlled hands instead of leaving it specifically to the Oregon Common School Fund would allow for more development to happen. And these are my sources. Thank you very much for listening. Don't forget to love each other, and let's have some summer already.